Hi, Mom again. So this is chapter 30 on page 227, Fire and Water. When I realized that there was little or nothing I could do to fend off these powerful visionary impulses, I grew afraid. I didn't understand how suffering and joy could go together. I already knew that physical pain and spiritual delight were compatible, but this intense combination of profound inner pain and exalted joy confounded me. I kept trying to resist my visions as I was ordered to do, but the effort was futile, and it only exhausted me. I would pick up my cross to defend myself against the one who was the defender of us all. It was perfectly clear that no one understood me, but I didn't mention this to anyone except my spiritual director, since it only would have been interpreted as further proof of my lack of humility. The Lord was pleased to relieve the bulk of my trial by bringing the Blessed Father Pedro de Alcantara to the city of Avila. As you may recall, I mentioned him earlier and said something about his unusual self-sacrifice. Someone verified to me that he did, in fact, wear a shirt made of tin shavings for more than 20 years. Father Pedro wrote several books in Spanish about the practice of prayer. His work has become very popular. Since he lived what he writes about, his words are very helpful to people who are inclined to walk a spiritual path. He also rigorously followed the first rule of the Blessed Saint Francis. Remember the wealthy widow I told you about, Dona Guiomar de Ulloa? Well, not only was she a good friend of mine, but she was a good friend to God. Guiomar knew all about my predicament. She had witnessed my great suffering and had been a tremendous source of comfort to me. Her faith was so strong that she was incapable of believing that my experiences were anything other than God-given. She did not agree at all with the men who insisted that my visions came from the spirit of evil. Guiomar was a very intelligent person and totally trustworthy. God gave her many favors in prayer. He also chose to enlighten her about matters of which learned men were ignorant. My spiritual directors allowed me to confide in her because she was extremely perceptive about certain things. Sometimes the Lord shared some of the favors he granted to me with Guiomar and accompanied them with words of wisdom that contributed to the growth of her own soul. When Guiomar heard that Father Pedro was in town, she obtained permission from my superiors to have me stay at her house for a week so I could talk more easily with the holy man. She made these arrangements without even telling me about it, so that all I had to do was show up and unburden my soul. During this time, Father Pedro came to Guillomar's house to meet with me, and I also spoke with him at some churches. Over the years, I spent a great deal of time with him on many different occasions. I gave Father Pedro as clear and honest a summary of my life and my spiritual path as I possibly could. Whenever I shared with anyone about my soul, I always tried to speak with transparency and truthfulness. I wanted them to know about my very first spiritual stirrings, and if there was anything I considered dubious, I would openly accuse myself. So I laid my soul bare to Father Pedro without duplicity or cover-up. Right from the beginning, I saw that Father Pedro understood me through experience. That was all I needed. I didn't even understand myself at that time. I didn't know how to put words around my experiences the way I do now. Later God allowed me both to understand and describe the favors that His Majesty granted me. But back then, I needed someone who had been through it himself so that he could explain the nature of my experiences. Father Pedro's teachings about imaginative visions were especially enlightening to me. I had been having a great deal of difficulty understanding what I saw with the eyes of the soul. I thought that the only worthy vision were those we see with our bodily eyes, and I didn't experience any of those. This holy man explained everything to me. Don't worry, he said, just praise God. He reassured me that my experiences were the work of the Spirit. Nothing could be truer or more reliable than these divine favors, he said, except for the teachings of our faith. I seemed to provide Father Pedro with some comfort as well. He was incredibly kind and helpful to me. From the time we met, he took an active interest in me and confided his own concerns and business matters. Father Pedro saw that the Lord had given me powerful desires for the things he had already obtained, as well as the courage to bring these longings to fulfillment. He generally enjoyed talking with me, for there is no greater pleasure for anyone God has brought to this state than meeting someone else in whom the Lord has begun to light the fire of love-longing. It was only just beginning for me then. God grant that I may be further along that path now. Father Pedro showed me the most touching compassion. You have already suffered one of the worst trials on earth, he said, when I told him how those good men had opposed me, but you still have a long way to go. You are very needy, and there is no one in this city who is capable of understanding you. He told me I would speak to my spiritual director and also to Don Francesco, who had caused me the most grief. It was only because of his great love for me that Don Francesco waged this war against me. He is a pious man, and since he saw that my soul had so recently been very wretched, he couldn't reconcile it with the divine favors I had suddenly begun to receive. The Holy Father Pedro assured these men that my experience was valid. He gave them many good reasons that they should feel safe and asked them not to bother me any more. It didn't take much to placate my confessor, but Don Francisco wasn't quite convinced. It was enough, however, at least to stop him from terrorizing me so much. Father Pedro and I agreed that from then on I would document each of my experiences in writing. We promised to pray for one another. He was so humble that he valued the prayers of someone as lowly as I. This embarrassed me. He filled me with comfort and joy and infused my practice of prayer with new confidence. Try not to doubt that your prayer comes from God, he told me. But if doubts do arise, or if you want to be absolutely sure, check your experiences with your confessor. That should keep you safe. I appreciated his assurances, but I couldn't fully take them in. Mine was a path of fear. If people told me my experiences came from the spirit of evil, I was inclined to believe them. But there was no man on earth who could either frighten me enough or reassure me enough for me to believe him over the feelings that God himself had planted in my soul. So although Father Pedro's words soothed and calmed me, they didn't entirely banish my anxiety, especially when the Lord plunged me into the soul suffering I'm about to recount. Overall, however, Father Pedro did console me. I couldn't thank God enough for the gift of friendship with this holy man. I had often prayed to my glorious Father St. Joseph as well as to Our Lady. Since Father Pedro was the primary representative of an order of St. Joseph, I believed the glorious saint had brought him to me, so I thanked him too. Sometimes I would suffer so many bitter spiritual trials, compounded by such severe bodily pain and sickness, that I was utterly helpless. This still happens even now, although to a lesser degree. At other times I grew seriously ill, but since I was not experiencing that soul suffering, I bore it with great joy. It was only when all my afflictions were combined that I was reduced to such a miserable state. Then I forgot all the favors the Lord had granted me. They were like a dream. This might be you. The only thing I could remember was pain. My mind was dull, and I was plagued by 1,000 doubts and suspicions. It seemed as if I had never understood the spiritual life and had imagined everything that had happened to me. Not only had I been deluded myself, I concluded, but I had deluded good men. I considered myself so thoroughly wicked that all the evil that had ever befallen the world must have been my fault. So I'm just going to check Messenger because it's coming from Australia. Please share. Ah, yes. Mariam sending out about Mahsa Amina, the woman who was killed in Iran for not wearing the hijab properly and showing too much hair. Tough times for sure. And I did elevate that in prayer for sure, and in community. Alrighty, so back to the text here. Maybe Saint Teresa can give us some help here. This was a case of false humility. Try again. This was a case of false humility. The spirit of evil invented all this to try and disquiet me and push my soul into despair. Since then, I have had a great deal of experience with the spirit of evil. He realizes that I see through him, so he doesn't torment me the way he used to. It's easy enough to recognize him through the effect he has on the soul. He begins by disturbing her, continues to agitate her throughout the time he is working on her, plants darkness and distress inside her, and leaves her so dried out that she has no inclination toward prayer or any other positive act. The spirit of evil seems to smother the soul and constrict the body, rendering them both powerless. It makes us feel so wretched that we hate ourselves. But these exaggerated thoughts of our own wickedness have nothing to do with true humility. True humility does not cause inner turmoil and spiritual unrest. True humility creates the opposite effect. It consoles the soul. It fills her with quietude, serenity, and light. True humility may carry an element of pain, but the soul experiences her suffering as a gift from God and hopes that her suffering serves him in some way. It grieves the soul to see how she has offended her beloved, but at the same time her spirit is relieved by his great mercy. She is enlightened enough to feel shame about her shameful behavior, but she is thrilled to see that God hasn't given up on her, and she praises him. It's wonderful to address the poison of shame that doesn't serve anything. When the spirit of evil creates a state of false humility, it banishes the light and obliterates all that is good in the soul. It seems as if God has wiped everything out with a flaming sword. The soul dwells on God's righteousness, but has trouble remembering his mercy. The spirit of evil is not powerful enough to make the soul lose her faith, but that faith no longer brings any consolation. Instead, when the soul does consider God's mercy, it only makes her feel worse because she thinks she should have done more to earn it. This kind of self-loathing is one of the spirit of evil's most insidious, painful, and deceptive tricks. I'm warning you about this so that if he tries to tempt you in this way, you will have the foresight to recognize it. Don't think it's a matter of academic learning or theological knowledge. Even though I am impoverished in these areas, the minute I escape from his clutches, it is obvious to me that I have been deceived and that my negative feelings were groundless. I have come to understand that the Lord allows the spirit of evil to test us in this way, just as he permitted the devil to tempt Job, although less severely because we are less saintly. Now I'm going to tell you about another way the spirit of evil tempted me. It happened the day before the feast of Corpus Christi, to which I am deeply devoted, though not as much as I should be. Sometimes I struggle with this temptation for as many as 15 days or even 3 weeks, maybe longer, but this time it only lasted until the feast day. It especially comes up during Holy Week, when prayer is my refuge. My mind is suddenly caught up in a stream of trivial thoughts. These things are so ridiculous that at other times they would make me laugh. The spirit of evil invades the intellect, ties it up, and does whatever he wants with it. The soul is no longer master of herself, and all she can do is think absurd thoughts. These thoughts have absolutely no purpose. They neither engage her nor release her. They serve only to oppress the soul that she feels as if she no longer fits inside herself. Sometimes it feels as if the devils are playing ball with my soul and she can't break free of their grasp. The soul's suffering during these times is beyond description. She seeks relief, but God will not allow her to find any. The light of reason remains, which overrides free will, but it is unclear, as if the eyes were covered with a film. The soul in this state is like a person who has so often taken a certain path that his feet remember the way even when it's dark out. He knows the places where he might stumble because he has seen them in the daytime, so he's on guard for those spots. The soul, too, moves by acquired feel, and so avoids offending God. Of course, this analogy does not take into account the beauty that the Lord always holds the soul in his hands, which is what really matters. During these times, faith and all the other virtues are put to sleep, but they are not lost. The soul never stops believing in the teachings of the Church, but all she can do is pay lip service to them. She is miserable and numb. She knows God the way a person hears something far away in the distance. Her love grows lukewarm. When she listens to someone talking about God, she believes him only because the Church tells her to, not because of any real memory of God's presence. Entering into solitude and prayer only increases the soul's anguish. She cannot bear the inner torment, yet she cannot identify its source. In my opinion, this experience is a mirror of hell. Actually, the Lord confirmed this for me in a vision. The soul is burning inside herself, and she has no idea who started the fire or where it came from or how to get away from it or what to put it out with. When she tries to soothe herself with a good book, she feels as if she has forgotten how to read. I remember one time when I tried to read the life of a saint. I was hoping it would absorb me, and that seeing the way he suffered might offer me some solace. After I read the same few lines 4 or 5 times, I understood even less than I had at the beginning, so I put the book down. This happened to me often, as though for some reason this particular instance stands out in my mind. It's even worse trying to carry on a conversation with someone. The spirit of evil puts me in such a foul temper that they all think I'm going to bite their heads off. I can't help it. I consider it an accomplishment just to be able to control myself. Actually, I know it's the Lord who keeps me under control. He holds me in his hands during times like this and prevents me from doing anything that might cause harm to my neighbor or offend God. It's absolutely useless to seek spiritual guidance when the soul is in this condition. It has been my experience anyway. Even though the confessors I had at that time were very holy men, and the confessors I go to these days are equally saintly, They spoke to me very harshly and scolded me when I most needed their compassion and support. Yep. When I told these men afterward how I felt about the way they had treated me, they were very surprised and claimed they were powerless to refrain from acting this way. They felt very sorry about the pain they caused me and tried not to do it again. Knowing how I had suffered in body and soul, they were determined to comfort me the next time I came to them with these problems, but they couldn't do it. They didn't exactly use bad words. That would have been an offense against God, but they used the strongest possible language allowed a confessor. Apparently they meant to mortify me, and there were times when I was ready and willing to suffer that kind of mortification. But when I was undergoing this particular trial, I couldn't bear it. I also used to worry that I was misleading my spiritual directors, so I went to them and warned them that I was quite capable of deception. Of course, I knew that I would never deliberately lie to them, but I was so afraid of everything that I thought I might inadvertently say the wrong thing and they would end up with the wrong idea. One of these men was familiar with the kind of temptation I was struggling with. "Don't worry," he said. "Even if you wanted to deceive me, I'm too smart to let myself be deceived." That was very comforting to me. I almost always felt at peace after receiving communion. Sometimes simply approaching the sacrament made me feel so good in the body and soul that I was truly amazed. It felt as if all the darkness of my soul was lifted in a single moment. And by the light of that radiant sunshine, I could clearly see how foolish all of my negative thoughts had been. At other times, a single word from my beloved cured me completely. Such as the time I told you about when he said to me, "Do not grow weary, do not be afraid." Or sometimes after seeing a vision as if there had never been anything wrong. I rejoiced in the Lord, and I also complained to him about all the torments I suffered. But he always repaid me afterwards by pouring his mercies upon me with great abundance. My soul would emerge from this crucible like gold, purified and refined, shining with a new radiance that enabled her to see God inside herself. Isn't that right? We make a home for him. Right? So he would be visible inside. And so, although our trials may seem unbearable, they eventually grow light. We are willing to suffer them all again if it means we will serve God in this way. From this perspective, we understand that there will be more persecutions and tribulations ahead, but if we endure them serenely without forsaking God, everything will work out for the best. I must admit I have not always handled my own trials quite so perfectly. There are times when I seem to be utterly incapable of thinking a single good thought, let alone putting one into action. My body and soul feel heavy and useless. The other temptations and worries I told you about are replaced with a deep sense of dissatisfaction with everything and everyone. When I have suffered from this sort of temptation, I have tried to force myself to perform some good works just to keep myself occupied. But I felt powerless to do anything in the absence of grace. This was not as painful as other trials, because the awareness of my own unworthiness brought me some relief. There are other times when I cannot seem to formulate any concept of God. Even if I'm alone, I am alone to practice prayer. Even if I'm alone, I am unable to practice prayer. Yet I still feel that I know God. The faculties of reason and imagination cause the trouble. The will remains inclined toward all that is good, but the intellect is out of control, like a lunatic no one can hold down. I can't even control my wild mind for the amount of time it takes to recite the creed. Sometimes I have the ability to witness my own misery and laugh at myself. I watch this inner madman to see what he's going to do. Glory be to God. To my surprise, my thoughts do not rush after evil, but turn to neutral things. My mind wanders here, there, and everywhere in search of something to think about. This makes me realize what a great favor His Majesty is doing me when He holds the madman bound in perfect contemplation. I'd love to see what would happen if all those people who think I'm so holy could witness this insanity. I actually feel compassion for my poor soul when she's in this state. I see that she's in bad company, and I long to set her free. I turn to the Lord. When, my God, I ask Him, when will I finally see the whole of my soul unified in praise of You? When will all my faculties come together to enjoy You at the same time? Do not allow my soul to be fragmented any longer. Each shard seems to pull me in a different direction. The scattering of the faculties happens to me often. Sometimes it seems obvious to me that this is the cause of most of my health problems. I also think that the legacy of original sin has something to do with our inability to enjoy all blessings in an integral way. Plus, my own transgressions exacerbate the problem. If I hadn't been so unconscious in the past, I would be more integrated now. Here is another terrible trial I suffered. I had read all the books on prayer, and I felt I understood them because the Lord had already given me such favors. I concluded that I did not need these books, so I focused on the lives of the saints instead. I considered myself severely deficient in the ways these men and women serve God, and I hoped to gain wisdom and encouragement from them. Then it struck me that thinking I had attained any kind of advanced spiritual states demonstrated a shameful lack of humility. But since I could not persuade myself to dismiss the reality of these states, I was very distressed. Finally, the blessed Father Pedro de Alcantara came along and told me not to worry about that. It is clear to me that I haven't begun to be of service to God. His Majesty has already granted me the kinds of blessings he gives to much more advanced souls. I am the very embodiment of imperfection. But I am well endowed with good desires, and my heart is full of love. I think the Lord has favored me with love longing so that I might have some way of serving him. I really do believe that I love him, but all my imperfect actions make me very sad. Then there are times when my soul suffers from what I can only call stupid attacks. I don't seem to be doing any harm, but I'm doing no good either. I'm just going along with the crowd, as they say. I'm not walking in pain, but I'm not walking in glory. I don't care if I die, but I don't mind if I keep living. Nothing pleases me, but nothing burdens me. I don't feel anything. My soul in this state is like a little dumb donkey grazing in a pasture. It is nourished because its food is provided, but it eats without even noticing that it's chewing and swallowing. The soul cannot help but feed on God's grace. She is content to live this humble life, but she doesn't experience any impulses or other effects that help her to understand herself. It seems to me now that the soul is drifting on a gentle breeze. She travels great distances without knowing how. In other stages of spiritual journey, the effects can be so dramatic that the soul has no doubt that she is growing as a result. Her desire surges, but nothing satisfies her. It makes her think of small, flowing springs I have seen. They never cease heaving up the sand all around them. This is what it's like for souls who reach this state. Love is continuously stirring inside them. They cannot stop thinking of all the things they will do for love. Just as the water in a spring does not seem to fit in the ground, so the earth casts it out of itself, the soul cannot contain the love inside her. She is soaked in its waters. Since she has such abundance, she wants others to drink and join in her praising God. Oh, how many times I have remembered the living water that Christ told the Samaritan woman about. I have always been very fond of that gospel passage. From the time I was a little girl, I often begged the Lord to give me that living water, long before I understood how good the water is. I kept a picture with me of the Lord coming to that well with these words inscribed beneath it, "Sir, give me this water." This love is like water and also like fire. The fire is vast and always needs fuel to consume that it will never go out. No matter how arduous the task may be, souls in this state will keep carrying wood so that the fire will not be extinguished. I'm not even content that I only have pieces of straw to toss in. Often, that's all I have to offer. Sometimes I laugh at myself. Other times I grow so weary I could cry. An inner impulse moves me to offer some service, but I'm not good for much. I arrange branches and flowers before holy images. I sweep a hallway or tidy the chapel. There are a few other tasks, but they are so trivial that it embarrasses me to mention them. Even when I performed some small penance, I knew it was meaningless unless the Lord counted the intention behind the act and discounted the act itself. I couldn't help but make fun of myself for my petty efforts. When God so bountifully gives the fire of his love to a soul who lacks the physical strength to do anything useful for him, it can be a terrible trial to her. Her grief is intense. If she is not strong enough to throw a little wood on that fire, she is terrified that it will go out. She is dying with longing and cannot do anything about it. I think a soul in this state consumes herself and turns to ash. She dissolves in tears and melts away. It is a severe torment. It is also a delightful one. Let the soul who has evolved to this point praise the Lord with all her heart, especially if he gives her the strength to sacrifice herself a little for his sake. Those to whom God has given the education, talents, and freedom to teach and bring other souls to him have no idea what a blessing this is unless they have experienced what it's like to be unable to do these things and yet still be the recipient of such lavish gifts from God. May he be blessed forever, and may the angels glorify him. Amen. I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing to put down so many details here. Ever since you sent me your most recent message telling me not to worry that I'm saying too much and to be sure not to leave anything out, I'm writing everything I can think of as clearly and truthfully as I can remember. I can't help but leave out a great deal, but I would be wasting even more time if I covered every little detail, and I have so little time available as it is. Even if I had more time to write, I doubt I could add anything worthwhile. All right, so that was Fire and Water. So I'm going to stop and pause here. I'm going to take a break. The next chapter will bring us to page 250 with about 100 pages left in the book, but I don't know if I'll get to it tonight, Mom. I want to do what Mariam requested of me and post these on YouTube. So hope you're having a great day, and I will talk to you later. Love you. Bye.